Eddie Redmayne, a lot of Oscar experts say that you're not only in this race for Best Actor, but you could win it. When you hear stuff like that, do you get excited or just freaked out?
Oh God, it's like beyond anything. You know, even hearing that people like your performance is the greatest thing in the world, particularly on this one where the expectations felt so high. Being in any way in that sort of conversation is an extraordinary privilege and beyond anything I'd ever had a dream of. So,
you have won an industry peer group award before. You won Broadway's Tony Award.
Yeah.
And what was remarkable about that is Red had won Best Play that night. Alfred Molina, your co-star, was supposed to win Best Actor and he didn't. So you were the face of the show on stage. What was that night like?
Oh, it was totally breathtaking. It was like that. There is this weird thing that happens with both film and theatre, that the intimacy and the sort of, I suppose, the grittiness of the process, like where we were making this film, and you know, really in the studios, it's really workmanlike and it's a hard grind. And then suddenly you're on a premiere in LA, and it feels so far removed from the reality. In the same way, when we started work on Red, it was Fred Molina, the loveliest human being in the world, Michael Grandage, John Logan, and I in a little room in London, and when the play did well in London, and then when it went to New York, we were like, it'll get killed in New York, and then when it moved on and on and on, it's just that night in Radio City was so far from that thing. It is actually beyond your dreams. It's like, but also when you care so passionately about something, which I did about that play, and I do about this film, it just means the world. It's an amazing thing.
2 years ago, you starred in Les Miserables, which was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. You've been through this before. What do you think people would be surprised to learn about the Oscar process, which is different from marketing another movie? For example, there are Q&As. It's a process that lasts for a few months, too.
Well, I mean, I didn't see a huge amount of it in Les Mis, but certainly as far as marketing the film is concerned, when it's a film that people's interests are piqued by, there seems to be more curiosity for it. And what I love about this film particularly is from the Q&As I've done, is there are different elements to it. So some people are curious about the science, some people are curious about the romance, others are about what it was like to meet Stephen. So there is actually, I'm finding a lot to talk about, and it constantly sort of keeps you on your toes and actually weirdly like informs the experience more. Because when you're in the process of making the film, you're in this myopia, you're in like a zone of only seeing Stephen's path through this story. And what's interesting is when you begin to see the thing as a bigger whole, you start having a new relationship with it.
You're limited as an actor with the amount of expression that you can show, of course.
Yeah.
You've talked in the past about an eyebrow has to suddenly become an expression in a huge way. Explain that.
Well, I mean, with ALS, the body declines and it sort of starts imprisoning you. But what was extraordinary about Stephen is as that happened, his brain started sort of embarking on new frontiers. But what was amazing when you meet him is, for someone who can move very few muscles, he has the most charismatic and expressive face I've ever seen. And his mum and Jane talk about how, as a young man, how expressive his eyebrows were, and how that helped him when it came to his physical decline. So it was a lot of time spent in front of a mirror with an iPad with all the documentary footage of Stephen, and me by myself in a room in a mirror trying to sort of emulate it. But really what became interesting as an acting challenge for me is that all the facilities we normally have of expression, whether it's tone of voice, whether it's gesture, all of that energy Stephen seems to sort of channel into those few muscles that we don't normally use, but that he has activated, and so it was like pushing all of that into those things that you could still use.
You spent 4 months preparing for the role and then finally met him in the home stretch then. What was the most surprising thing about meeting the man?
What was most surprising for me was I'd read and watched everything, and I'd got a sense of his humour. What I hadn't got a sense of was quite how funny he was, how extraordinary his timing is, and choice of vocabulary. When you are that limited, when it takes you that long to say something, he chooses his words very specifically. but also this mischief. This I describe it as like a Lord of Misrule quality. There's like he really controls a room, and there's a glint in his eye, and that was something that I really wanted to bring into the performance, and Felicity and I both worked on finding that humour, because Jane has that as well, and really trying to bring that to each scene.
Do you have a favourite scene in the movie?
Oh gosh, I've got a couple. One of my favourite scenes is actually a scene with Charlie Cox, who's an old friend, and who plays Jonathan. And there's a scene where Stephen goes into the church and with a couple of beers, and Jonathan's there, and it was written just as a scene of them just sort of sitting there. And Charlie feeds me the beer, and then he improvised something like, he's an old mate of mine as well, and he sort of improvised something like, "Be careful, you've got to drive," I think was the turn he said. And I lost it. I out of character, I sort of completely lost it, but I fortunately sort of stayed enough in. Anyway, they ended up using it in the film, and it always makes me smile because it's just like my old pal, like messing with me on set, basically.
Is this the biggest challenge of your acting career because you're limited in how expressive you can be in the role, and also how important this man is? He's one of the most important people in modern times.
It was definitely the most challenging thing I've done, but it was also like we dream of this. You know, if our job is to try and, or our dream is to tell interesting stories about interesting people, they don't come much better than this. So the whole process for me was a weird and wonderful mixture of absolute privilege and great fear. So it was definitely the hardest, but also the most rewarding.
But what people are surprised about with this film is it's a love story.
Yeah.
They think they're going to go see this science lecture, and in fact, it's a human relationship story. How did this move you?
Well, what moved me about it, and it was both, it was meeting many people suffering from ALS, but specifically Stephen and Jane's story, is that these people had gigantic obstacles put in front of them. And how they chose to defy those obstacles is what I feel like has defined them. And that idea that you are given that sentence of 2 years, and Stephen says every day beyond that was a gift, and how he's chosen, and Jane have chosen to live life passionately and fully and make the most of every single moment, for me is just it's like an everyday lesson when I get caught up in the anxieties of daily grind, you know. It's so that's how it's moved me.